Hi, everybody. You're here with Liz Fox Gray, host of Fox Talks. Welcome to my special today, live at 11 a.m. on JessFM. Today, I'm speaking to NDP MP Niki Ashton from Manitoba, and she's also the NDP leader candidate. Hi, Niki. How are you today?
I'm very good. Great to be with you.
All right. I'm glad you're here. So, why don't you give us a little overview about what you're doing right now?
Well, we just wrapped up our tour in Alberta. It was great. We were in Edmonton, Red Deer, Lethbridge, and then we finished off in Calgary. And then I'm out continuing the tour, I guess, out east for a couple of days, and then I'll be back in touring in Saskatchewan. And what we're doing is we're bringing a message of our campaign that inviting people to join our campaign to support my candidacy. Inviting people that are NDP, people that are interested in the NDP, and people that just see themselves as progressive to be part of a progressive campaign that aims to bring the NDP back to its principles, because I do feel that we've distanced ourselves from them and bring us back to the sense that we're a movement for change, and also be part of a campaign that's tackling the big issues of our time, growing inequality, and also the threat of climate change. And when we're talking about growing inequality, a lot of us like to talk about how Canada's different than the U.S., that we're better than the U.S., but actually, when it comes to economic inequality, we're becoming more and more like the U.S.
That is
You know,
true.
and that kind of inequality is particularly evident, well, in many communities, Indigenous, New Canadian, amongst women, people with disabilities, queer and trans people. It's particularly evident for the first time in our history amongst young people, an intergenerational
Yep.
inequality. I'm an older millennial, but I've spent the last year and some traveling the country listening to what young people are facing. And we've got an emerging crisis where young people are in cycles of precarious work with high student debt and inability to settle down and achieve life goals that their parents and those older than them have been able to do. And what we're saying is we need a strong progressive vision to take these challenges on and achieve the kind of justice, the economic justice, social justice, and environmental justice that everybody deserves.
And that's actually important that you brought up the inequalities because I think a lot of people don't understand how inequalities actually threaten democracy. And the group of people that are actually becoming more prevalent in poverty are actually children. And without us being able to have a lot of social programs in place for them, we're not exactly setting them up to have a brighter future. And I don't think people are really understanding that because we're kind of going on this neoliberal idea of cutbacks
Mm-hmm.
to social systems, and then that affects the policies that are being put out, like the social programs. How can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the inequality we're seeing is exactly a result of neoliberal agendas put forward by governments and promoted by corporations and the wealthiest in our countries. I mean, it's I would say it's agendas that include privatization,
Yep.
um,
Deregulation.
deregulation,
Yep.
right? Austerity, bad trade deals, and increased corporate concentration. And we're reaching a point where, well, just a couple months ago, we found out that 2 Canadian billionaires own the same amount of wealth as the 11 million worse off Canadians. And that kind of a statistic is unacceptable in a country as wealthy as Canada. So we do need to make sure that we're fighting against these cuts. Now, in Alberta, I was really heartened to see the investments that have been taking place in childcare, in nutrition for children, but the issue is also that nationally we're not investing in these kinds of programs.
No, we're not.
You know, and that's critical to lifting everyone up, and in particular young people that are on the margins.
Well, that's the thing is that when we had policies that there was some investment in children, there was some social investment going on, but then as the Harper Party came in, he actually cut those policies that they had in place. So that actually was really detrimental to that because I
Mm-hmm.
know that women's issues are extremely important to you as they are to myself, that there isn't enough child care help out there, that women can't seem to get ahead because there is the neoconservative idea that women need to be at home and be mothers, but then there's the neoliberal ideas that women should be seen as agendered and out there trying to be self-sufficient and working hard. So, I mean, it's contradiction for women because there's that trope of women are supposed to have it all, but yet women aren't being given the same equal opportunities as some other people have been given.
Yes, absolutely. You said it better than I could, I think. I mean, we're constantly up against pressures to succeed when in fact there's so many barriers, and I would say as the social safety net gets cut further, particularly at the national level, but also provincially, those barriers only increase on women. So I would say that I'm very proud of the campaign that we're running as a feminist. I said right when I announced that I see myself as an intersectional feminist, and it's important to have an intersectional feminist agenda, and that means, yes, we're talking about justice, yes, we're talking about fairness and dignity, but we need to have a feminist lens. What does it mean for women? What does this mean for racialized women, for queer women, for Indigenous women? And what does it mean for men as well? I mean, we all suffer when inequality increases. And
exactly.
So I would say that, I would say we need to challenge the sort of the quote unquote traditional ideas of what a woman's place is. I mean, I always say a woman's place is in the House of Commons, and I've certainly been honored to be in there for a while. But,
and we're proud to have you there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I like. One other thing that I want to speak about, because we should look at things through a feminist lens. And I think what people get misconstrued when we talk about feminism is that they have this idea that it's basically for women and women only. But it also speaks to minorities, any kind of group of minorities. It speaks to men. It speaks to anybody who has been disenfranchised, anybody who has been had some experience with inequality or injustice. And I think in Canada, like, we're kind of falling away from some of those ideals of what it is to be actually Canadian and what democracy is supposed to mean. So, I mean, with the NDP coming through and trying to create these new social programs, like in Alberta, there is a new social program that goes out to families that are eligible for it. And I don't think a lot of people are really aware of actually what the NDP are doing. I think they have this idea that they came in and ruined the oil industry, which is absolutely like unrealistic. So how would you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I have to say that I'm deeply inspired by the work that's happening in Alberta at the provincial level. I mean, I admire the work of Premier Notley, somebody who's faced a lot of sexism on an individual level.
Yeah.
And she and her government have pushed back, and they're putting forward a very progressive agenda. And of course, I mean, it's important that we all know our history and how we end up in these very crude boom and bust economies. I mean, I come from a mining town, and I know how devastating a boom and bust economy is. But that's why in previous administrations or governments in Alberta have allowed for there not to be a cushion in difficult times or the kind of diversification that's necessary. Yes, we have resources. Yes, they're important to our economy. But we need to diversify and make sure that we're not dependent on one or two sort of sectors of the economy. And I would say that I think they've handled the need to explain their agenda very well. They've talked about the need to diversify. They've talked about the need to transition to a green economy, and they've talked about the way in which jobs can be created as a result. And I just read that in the last little while, 20,000 full-time jobs have been created in Alberta. I really appreciate. I really applaud the work that the government is doing.
Yep.
And I think that what we're seeing from the Conservatives, for example, provincially. I used to work in Parliament with Jason Kenney. That kind of divisive politics, the homophobic politics, the sexist politics. I mean, that's not Alberta. I mean, I have family there, I have friends there. That's not Canada. Sure, maybe some people feel that way, but that's certainly not the majority of people. And people respect one another. They want tolerance, and I think they want to focus on the big questions like jobs, the economy, and the environment. And that's where the NDP is excelling.
And I guess it's important because you brought up intersectionality, and that's important because it's important not to see just one view of like one certain thing causing a certain problem. It's taking all of these things into consideration and working with them to create some better programs and some better ideas. But I guess one of the biggest things that we really have to work on is the inclusion, what you're talking about, with the tolerance and things like that. And so, um, with some of the failures that people have seen through what's been going on in the economy, like, I mean, people want to push for that deregulation, and that comes with the neoliberal ideas. But what that does is that's what creates some of these issues. Like you look at the crisis that happened in 2008, that is because of neoliberalism and the deregulation in the housing market, and that's what spurred all of those issues. And what saved Canadians is that we have high regulations and we have those rules and things in place with the government being involved. So that's actually what saved us. So I think people kind of have not quite a clear idea of actually how these things kind of work back and forth and how we get these booms and busts in the country. So, I mean, you need to have the government getting involved instead of taking it away, because when you have it involved, that makes up for the failures of the market. We're supposed to kind of fill in those gaps, and that's what we need, and that's what I see the NDP doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It can't. If we leave, as we've seen, if we leave things up to the market, the market looks after the 1%, the wealthiest, and what we need is policies and an approach where everybody benefits, and especially as we see inequality increasing, we can't be doing more of the same. We need to do things differently, and I'm seeing that sentiment very clearly amongst the millennials, younger Canadians who are experiencing inequality disproportionately, and they're saying that, we need free tuition.
Yeah.
We need expanded pharmacare. We need dental care. We need to talk about transition to. We need to talk a lot more about public ownership and like our campaign has said, a lot more about nationalization. So it's like ways of creating jobs in our own communities rather than seeing jobs be shipped out through trade agreements or foreign ownership. And so those solutions are out there, and I think there are definitely a growing number of voices who are speaking to them. And what we're saying is our campaign is there to mobilize around these issues and affect change.
And I see, like, it's important that you brought up the free tuition because when I was a student and the Wild Rose Party made the cuts to education, like, that was definitely felt. And I believe that, like, because the free tuition is so important, because education is important, because what education does, it allows people to participate more, because it gives people a sense of civic duty, and it also allows them to understand politics better, and then it gets them to participate and engage. And when we have these ideas that we see among especially younger people coming up, and then we can express those through voting, through things like that, then we can actually get the policies that we need to change to make these things go into action.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, and I think the appetite is increasing for change and an alternative progressive vision, and I'm very excited about it. I'm very hopeful.
I'm very hopeful as well. So, also, Niki, you were the former critic of Indigenous Affairs. And can we speak to a little bit of some of those Indigenous issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, okay. So what I was thinking about is, like, because of some of the policies that have changed and through healthcare and definitely through the welfare state, there's an increasing stigma that goes with single Indigenous mothers who have to access social benefits just in order to kind of live and, take care of their children. How do you see some of those things coming to be in the future?
Yeah, well, I would say that for sure when we're talking about inequality in our country, nowhere is it most evident than amongst Indigenous communities. It's unbelievable that as a result of Canadian colonial policies, both in the past and colonial approaches currently, that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities often live in disproportionate poverty. This is particularly the case on reserve situations. We see it in many of our cities, particularly in Western Canada. And this has everything to do with like I said, a history of systemic racism, underfunding, and that underfunding continues till today. And in a sense, ultimately, that Ottawa knows best. I mean, First Nations, Indigenous communities fall under federal jurisdiction, and for far too long, the directive comes from Ottawa. First Nations are not necessarily supported in pursuing the direction that they know is best for their communities. The same can be said for Métis and Inuit communities. And at the end of the day, what we do know is that First Nations or Indigenous communities are disproportionately represented when it comes to poverty, when it comes to health issues, when it comes to incarceration.
Yeah.
And we need to, we need to, and I would say that, it's become very fashionable to talk about reconciliation, and certainly I'm very committed to that notion, but that requires action, not just words. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission gave us some very clear directives. The government has yet to implement them. I think they've only moved on perhaps a couple of them. They have failed to address the underfunding. The Child Welfare Tribunal has directed the government to address the underfunding when it comes to child welfare on First Nations, and they've still refused. And so despite even, I would say, Prime Minister Trudeau's rhetoric, talking about his commitment to First Nations, the reality is when you look at action, it continues to be a paternalistic and colonial relationship, and often that kind of inequality, unfortunately, serves to exacerbate racist and discriminatory perspectives. And so what I would say, and certainly our campaign is saying, is we need to have a very strong platform and commitment to a relationship with Indigenous communities. That means adopting and implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is a framework for everything when it comes to working with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities. We need to address the underfunding, and we need to work in partnership, not in a way where we believe that we know when that Ottawa knows best or the federal government knows best, because that's simply not the case. And for me, this all comes from the grassroots level. I've had the honor of representing 41 First Nations in northern Manitoba. I've been incredibly inspired by the resilience of so many Indigenous leaders in our north. I've become inspired by so many Indigenous leaders across Western Canada who so often are such very strong voices against what the federal government has been doing, both under Harper and even now under Trudeau. And and we need to show solidarity in those struggles, and we need to alongside Indigenous peoples pursue the justice that they deserve.
And that's true, because when you go to speak about like colonial discourse, and when that actually comes to neoliberalism, and the push for First Nations people to become, self-determination, self-regulating, things like that, self-governing, that actually comes with like a government neoliberal kind of agenda behind it. That it's been in recent scholarship that that the actual sorry, that the actual core of what Indigenous people mean by self-determination isn't actually coming to fruition, because it's actually not being true to what they want, because it has that agenda behind it. And I also agree, like, we do need to have these enduring relationships with First Nations people, with Métis, with Inuit people, when it comes to policy and planning, because not all certain policies actually translate into all communities the same. So they may work in some areas, but they don't work in all, because traditionally, First Nations people, they have a collective idea about the way they go about governing themselves. And so when you introduce policies that highlight, individualism, it doesn't always work. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Well, traditionally, Indigenous communities are collectivists in their approach. That's certainly how both and also I would say a very clear understanding that we're not separate from the environment, that together we are part of the same system, and that is in direct conflict with neoliberalism, with capitalism, and I think what's very clear is that we're seeing a way in which that neoliberal agenda has sought to exploit Indigenous communities and impoverish Indigenous communities, and produce some wealth for some, but at the expense of so many others, and that's a very clear indication of the need uh, to change course, to challenge the system that is only serving to further marginalize people, and so and I'm very inspired by a lot of the incredible activism that we're seeing. I mean, back with Idle No More, more recently in terms of some of the activism around the environment, also on issues like child welfare and Indigenous rights. There's so many Indigenous leaders that are challenging the status quo, challenging mainstream views of economics and politics, and we need to work with them.
That's true. That's why I said that, like, those enduring relationships are extremely important. So when we go into policy and planning, that, we're speaking to many members and not just a few, like you said. But I wanted to ask you, because you did bring up the environmental issues and the importance of the activism, because activism kind of gets a bad rap at times, when we have um, these social movements. And I mean, they're trying to change some of these things that are creating these inequalities. So it's really good that you can speak to that and that you've actually brought that up. Like, I don't know more because of the environmental issues. What kind of environmental things are you trying to approach right now? Like, what is the main concern?
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, one of the two biggest challenges we face is the threat of climate change. I think we've seen, a number of weather phenomena across the country that point to that. I think we've also seen the way in which, our winters are changing, our summers are changing. Canada being a northern country, we see some of these, the impacts, in very clear ways. I know we certainly see them up north. And what we're saying is that we can't afford to go on as we have. We need to support jurisdictions, including Alberta, that have embarked on a very strong agenda when it comes to the environment, and we need to do a lot better nationally. I mean, despite his commitment of real change, Mr. Trudeau's climate change commitments are the same as Harper's, and as has been indicated recently, there's virtually no chance that we're going to be able to achieve them because of the inaction from the government. We need to invest in green economy, in education and training and innovation. We know that so many jobs can be produced as a result of investments in alternative energies, and building better, more efficient infrastructure in our communities, and with respect to energy and our broader needs. We've also talked about the need to have a principled approach when it comes to new developments, whether it's pipelines or broader resource development, and that means ensuring that is there consultation and consent from Indigenous peoples through
Yep.
whose territories such developments would take place? Are we meeting our environmental regulations and our climate change commitments? Is there social license for these projects? And that's what can determine whether or not we will go forward. The days of when government would run roughshod over Indigenous rights and environmental rights are long gone, and I think many of us realize that, see it very clearly, and I would say that if we're going to build a future that is just, there's absolutely no question that we need to meet. We also need to be talking about environmental justice.
And that's true, like, because when it comes, like, particularly to the media, I guess there has to do with agenda setting and framing on how people understand these issues that are going on. So, I mean, there is a lot more coverage now on those ideas, such as being mindful and culturally sensitive to Indigenous people. So, I mean, like, we have to think about the structural violence that's going on. So, land degradation, just, not respecting some of these rights and these from Indigenous people, especially when it comes to new development. I know that you had some major support from somebody pretty important named Michael Moore. Do you want to talk to me about that?
Oh, sure. That was, yeah, that goes back to some work we did a few years ago in our community in Thompson to save the value-added jobs related to mining in our community. Stephen Harper allowed a Brazilian multinational to buy out the Canadian mining company in our region. And as soon as their agreement lapsed, they tried to slash half of our jobs all the value-added jobs, which of course are fundamental to any resource economy. And our community was reeling from the announcement. Um, we opposed the announcement. We rejected the arguments put forward by the company, and we saw it as a clear. Sort of as a clear sign of greed, and all the while, I should note that they had just received a $1 billion loan from Export Development Canada. This was clearly a sign of the way in which foreign ownership does not benefit Canadians and Canadian communities. And so we decided to fight back, and we did petitions, we did a letter writing campaign, we reached out to the media, and we did a video. And it was actually, the team that worked with me, and everybody was under 30 at the time, and we said, you know what, we have to get our community story out there, and we did. And it got quite a few views. This was before the days of Facebook was still around, but not to the extent that it is now.
Yeah.
We saw that we were hitting a ceiling, and we said, well, and I was thinking one day, actually, I was traveling on the ice roads in my constituency, and I was looking out at the at the sky, and I was thinking, who's interested in these stories and in these in this kind of a fight. And then of course I was very familiar with Michael Moore's work, huge fan of Michael Moore, of course.
Yep.
And I said, well, why don't we reach out to him? And I didn't think it would go very far, so we did. I did send him a message, and lo and behold, his team got back to us, and we ended up embarking on this campaign together. And as a result, we were able to delay the announcement of the impending cuts. And restore some ability to hold on to the value-added jobs in our community. Now the battle is still not it's ongoing, and we are at threat once again a number of years later to lose these jobs, but we're continuing to fight, and I'm forever appreciative of the chance to work with Michael Moore, and I'd love to work with him in the future.
That sounds wonderful. That sounds exciting, actually, and it's really good. And I'm really happy that you're continuing to fight those fights, because we need more people to do that. I know we only have a couple more minutes with you left here, so I just want to ask you a few things. I know public concerns really do affect what policy takes place. So one of the major public concerns in southern Alberta is the fentanyl use around Indigenous people and that epidemic that's going on. Would you see any kind of policies or any kind of things that might come in to help care for that situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was, along with my colleagues in the NDP, we did support speeding a national response to the fentanyl crisis, and because unfortunately the federal government was taking a while, but it seems to me that they've kicked off some things, but much more needs to be done, and that means investing in outreach, awareness, prevention. While I was in Alberta, I spoke with two organizations that work with people that are drug users, or that others that suffer from addiction, and they talked about the challenges they face in terms of funding, particularly at the federal level. These are organizations that know the work that they're doing. People are coming to them for help. We need to support them on an ongoing basis, not just project to project, but recognize that we must engage in harm reduction, and this is all to save lives.
Absolutely, because we need to take away that stigma of criminalization of people who have drug dependencies, and create this trope that these people need help. It's a sickness. It's not
Yep.
something that's something bad character of who they are. These things are socially constructed at times. These things have a complex array of reasons for
Mm-hmm.
why they've happened. So we need to kind of send that message as well. But I want to thank you for talking to me today, Niki. I've had a great time hearing all the things that you're doing. It sounds wonderful. I'm extremely happy to know that there's a strong, beautiful woman like you out there fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much, Liz. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and and I really appreciated your take on the key issues we're facing. And to your listeners, if people are interested in finding out more, they can check us out on our website, nikiashton2017.ca, or of course connect through social media. And we're inviting people to sign up to vote. We're inviting people to engage, to share their feedback of what the struggle against inequality looks like for them. And we're looking to build, like I said, a movement for change, the kind of change that involves achieving social, environmental, and economic justice for all of us.
And that's perfect. And that's what we need to make sure that we stay a nation strong and free. All right. Thank you, Niki. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Liz.
You take
We'll be
care.
in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Thanks for listening to Fox Talks on JessFM. And if you didn't get to hear this interview live, we will be re-airing it Saturday at 7 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Hey, baby, do you want some tea? Babe. Are you just gonna hang around all day?